Joan of Arc, Part 2, Scene 5, Take 1412. Action!
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the History and Mystery channel. I'm your host, Chronicler, and I want you to like and subscribe. Now that you've done that, we're gonna delve into Part 2 of our two-parted series about Joan of Arc. Today, we will talk about the conspiracy theories that are leaving a mark on a legacy. But before we do that, I recommend you to watch Part 1 if you haven't done that yet. In Part 1, we summarized her life story that did include some vital information that will help you better understand the things we will discuss today. To watch it, you can press the link in the description below. For the people that stayed, let's get back to the story. During the centuries, many people before us already delved into Joan of Arc's life story. During these diggings into her life story, a couple of people came up with some interesting theories that we will discuss today. These theories are: was Joan of Arc a bastard child of royalty? Was it really Joan of Arc that got executed? And the last one would claim that Joan of Arc was a member/leader of a witch cult. For this video, I decided to make 5 questions that we will use and answer for every conspiracy theory that we will discuss today. And those questions are: 1. Who made these claims? 2. In what year did these theories came about? 3. What does the theory tell us? 4. How much evidence is there? And the last one, number 5, are they believable, or can we brush them off as nothing more than a nice story? So, let us start with number 1. Was Joan of Arc a bastard child of royalty? This claim was made by Pierre Case in 1890 and would be published in a book named La Vérité sur Joan d'Arc. Pierre would argue in this book that Joan of Arc was the bastard child of Isabeau of Bavaria and Duke Louis of Orleans. What we do know for fact is that the two knew each other very well, because the Duke of Orleans was the younger brother of her husband. What we also know is that King Charles VI struggled with mental illnesses and insanity. This forced Isabeau of Bavaria and Duke Louis of Orleans to work closely together to lead a kingdom that got pulled into a power vacuum. This power vacuum created 2 camps, the Armagnacs and the Burgundians, who would later align themselves with the English during the 100-year War. When Isabeau of Bavaria decided to side with the Armagnacs, who were led by Duke Louis of Orleans, the Burgundians accused her of adultery with the Duke, which does sound like fake news if you look at the timing of the accusation. She joined your rival faction, so you tried to put her in bad light. But on the other side, they did work very closely together, and the royalties at the time were known to be the most faithful towards their partners. Let's say she did do that and gave birth to a child who would later become the famous Joan of Arc. Then this would have meant that Joan and King Charles VII were half brother and sister, which is something that would explain how Joan of Arc could have won over the trust of King Charles VII during the private conversation between them. In this book, Pierre states that Joan would have given King Charles a secret sign that only royal families were familiar with. By giving this sign, Joan would provide enough evidence to King Charles VII to prove that she was his lost half-sister that got hidden away, far away from the royal castle at birth. It is said that after giving birth to Joan, Isabeau of Bavaria hid her away in a small village called Domremy. In this village, the family of Arc took her in and raised her as a good Christian girl. It all sounds possible until we start to take a deeper look into this theory, because that's when we start seeing a couple cracks in it. For example, Duke Louis of Orleans got assassinated on orders of the Burgundian-aligned John the Fearless on November the 23rd in 1407. And Isabeau of Bavaria would deliver his son, King Charles VII, on November 10 in 1407. The likelihood of conceiving a daughter in the interim time would have been extremely small. Also, that would mean that Joan would have been 23 when she died and not 19, which was the age that she herself claimed during her trial in 1431. Of course, she could have lied about her age, and the birth registration of children at the time wasn't as good as nowadays. Furthermore, Pierre would claim that the coat of arms that was given to Joan, her family, by King Charles VII had a hidden sign in it that would represent her bastardry. It is said that the sword on her coat of arms is a baton for bastardry because it pierces through a royal crown. It still sounds pretty vague to me, and if this was true, it would make it really unique, but also inconsistent with the laws of heraldry. It would also mean that a lot of people would have known that Joan was a bastard child. Maybe the words of Virgine Pernaud and Marie Veronique Glynn could give us some more clarence about this claim. So I quote, "Yet amateur historians still insist that all these people, as well as Charles VII, the Duke of Alençon, Dunois, Bertrand de Poulengy, carried out an intricate plot to disguise Joan's authentic royal parents. This thesis lacks credible documentation." End quote. For me, this quote already answers our last question, if the conspiracy theory is believable. And I would say no, because of the lack of evidence and lack of strong supported arguments. So let's move on to our second conspiracy theory. Was it really Joan of Arc that got executed? Following Joan of Arc's execution, several young women came forward claiming to be Joan of Arc. One of those stories was written down by Ebenezer Coben Brewer in his 1870 volume of Brewer's Dictionary of Phrase and Fable. In this volume, he tells us about a young woman who claimed to be Joan of Arc, and after a meeting with her the brothers of Joan of Arc, she convinced them that she really was Joan and survived all those years. This meeting between the woman who claimed to be Joan of Arc and Joan of Arc, her brothers, happened in 1434. And after this meeting, they teamed up and started traveling to France from town to town and starting off at the place where Joan of Arc delivered an incredible victory, the city of Orleans. When they arrived in Orleans, they received lavish gifts from multiple believers and admirers of Joan of Arc. Two of those admirers were members of royalty, Princess Elizabeth of Luxembourg and Duchess Elizabeth von Görlitz. All went well for the woman who claimed to be Joan of Arc until she made the mistake of visiting King Charles VII in Paris. Shortly after arriving in Paris, King Charles VII would ask her a question that only Joan of Arc could know. He asked her what secret she told to him the first time they met, the secret that made Charles believe that Joan of Arc was sent by God to defeat the English. After hearing this question, the woman admitted that she was a pretender and begged for the king's forgiveness. She told the king that she used to be a soldier in the Pope's army, that her real name was Jean. The king forgave her, and Jean would later marry a knight named Robert d'Aumont, making her Jean d'Aumont. Jean and Robert d'Aumont would retire in a castle at Joigny and would have 2 children. After hearing about her own confession that she wasn't Joan of Arc, I think we can fairly say that she was nothing more than an impostor. That is, unless you would like to believe Mr. Octave Delipierre, who had published a pamphlet called Doute Historique. In his pamphlet, he would also deny the fact that Joan got burned at the stake and would claim that Jean d'Aumont really was Joan of Arc, even though she herself admitted to being an impostor. Mr. Octave Delipierre cites a document discovered by Father Vignet in the 17th century in the archives of Metz. This document would prove that she became the wife of Robert d'Aumont and that she became the mother of 2 children. Vignet also found a marriage contract hidden away in the family muniment chest. The marriage contract was between Robert d'Aumont, knight, and Joan of Arc, surnamed the Maid of Orleans. In 1740, they would also find records of several payments for messages from Joan to her brother John. They would find these records in the archives of the Maison de Ville in Orleans. These messages were stamped with the year 1435 and 1436. To me, this still doesn't prove enough, because it could have been all forged, and if it was true, why couldn't she tell King Charles VII the secret message she gave him before, and why would she herself admit that she was an impostor, unless King Charles VII threatened her and made her lie? But there is no evidence to support such a theory. So, let us move on to our last theory. Was Joan of Arc a member/leader of a witch cult? In 1921, Margaret Murray, who was an anthropologist, argued that Joan of Arc was correctly identified as a witch by the religious authorities. These religious authorities would also sentence Joan of Arc to death by burning her alive. Margaret Murray argued that Joan of Arc and Gilles de Rais were the leaders of an ancient pre-Christian pagan belief, and that in this religion Joan of Arc was the incarnation of a Roman god named Diana. For those who don't know who Gilles de Rais was, I will give a short background story. Gilles was known to be a companion of Joan during the 100-Year War, but that's not what made him infamous. He was accused of child murders, trying to summon demons, witchcraft, and for being involved in other aspects of the occult. These accusations would mean the end of him, and he got executed and sentenced to death by hanging in 1440. Margaret Murray claimed that the pagan belief of Joan and Jill was still highly worshipped by the common folk of Europe, and that's why Joan had such a success with gaining support and inspiring an army, which was made up by predominantly common folk. This would mean that Joan of Arc was a figurehead in a rivalry between the Roman Catholic Church and the less pagans of Europe, which would explain why Joan of Arc only received a religious trial in which she would be sentenced to death for her blasphemous behavior. The theory also states that during the 15th century, the church was fighting a war against the pagans, that this was one of the first major strikes against the pagans. Murray's views have mostly been dismissed by historians because of the lack of evidence and because of the extensive proof that Joan of Arc was a deeply religious Christian. If you ask me, this conspiracy theory sounds more like a good story than factual, just like the other ones that we discussed. But looking back, there's still one thing that remains strange to me: the friendship between Joan of Arc and the occult baron called Gilles de Rais. Well, that's a story for another day. I want to thank you all for listening. See you in the next one. And remember, history is written in mystery.